that in itself is inevitable if you go minoxidil only, and maybe you'll drag out your, the visual representation of loss by another few years, another 5 years, maybe another 10 years if you're like super, super lucky. What's up guys, Derek, morepleatsmoredates.com. Today we're going to be talking about why you would still be losing hair while using minoxidil. So for some reason, people think minoxidil is, well, it's not for some reason. A lot of people just don't understand how it works is the main problem. So getting to the root of the mechanism of action is something that nobody really does when it comes to drugs. They just assume, oh, a doctor said take minoxidil for thinning hair, so therefore this is sufficient for hair loss prevention because the FDA has approved it as such. While minoxidil can encourage hair growth via its underlying mechanism, which is vasodilation essentially, it does absolutely nothing to combat androgens themselves. So androgen receptor activation is what mediates this cascade of events that eventually leads to the miniaturization of the hair follicle. If you've seen my other content, you've already seen me talk about this subject many times now. Using a growth agonist like minoxidil absolutely does nothing to prevent further loss. All it does is essentially improves your rate of growth, which cosmetically may offset the visual loss of density and or recession that you would otherwise get if you were doing absolutely nothing. But at the end of the day, even if you are increasing your rate of growth, your rate of loss is still exactly the same. You're not going to prevent androgens from miniaturizing hair follicles unless you do something to deal with androgen receptor activation or some other mechanism that has to do with the metabolites, such as 5-alpha reduction, or something along those lines that has to do with actual dealing with the problem itself, not just boosting your growth rate and encouraging, healthier growth and whatnot is good, but it's not the priority. The priority is getting your loss halted. You want to literally stop that in its tracks before you focus on things that are going to provide regrowth. So the first thing you should always focus on is, how do I handle however much excessive androgen receptor activation is occurring? Not necessarily excessive androgen receptor activation, I should say whatever degree to which the androgens in your body are a problem. So however much you need to do to halt your loss from getting worse essentially. And only once you've done that should you focus on using agents for regrowth, in my opinion, because at the end of the day, if you use, LLLT, if you use minoxidil, if you use castor oil, if you use microneedling, if you do any of these things that might encourage better growth and improve your density and, even regrow dead zones to some extent potentially. At the end of the day, the thing that is ultimately going to facilitate if you get worse or not is not throwing a bunch of growth agonists at yourself. It's going to be the androgens in your body continuing their exact same function that they were doing before. So until you address that, you're not really getting rid of your hair loss or preventing it from getting worse. You're just visually band-aiding the issue. If you put a band-aid over it with cosmetic enhancements by improving your growth rate or, doing whatever you think is the best thing to do, it's not going to protect you from further loss. So you need to get that loss rate to ideally as close to zero as possible before you focus on the other side of the equation, in my opinion, because at the end of the day, the less drugs you use, the better. In like the grand scheme of things, you want to be on the least things possible. And in terms of priority list of what the most important thing is to the last, growth agonists fall on the bottom of the list of priorities here. The top things are dealing with either androgen receptors themselves, 5-alpha reductase, or any other way you want to go about dealing with, the HPTA, endogenous androgen secretion, the synthesis of metabolites and whatnot that lead, like DHT, the things that actually are a problem, not, band-aiding your issue by just cranking your growth rate through the roof. And then once you actually get to a point where you can see a visual representation of loss, even with, minoxidil, your hair loss has gotten to such a bad point that you're pretty much, there's no coming back at that point because you have already, lost all that ground, even with that artificial stimulus pushing yourself to super physiological growth territory. You have like an unnatural amount of vasodilation occurring, probably, you know, lower blood pressure than you would normally have, all these things, and you're still noticing a cosmetic loss. That in itself is inevitable if you go minoxidil only, and maybe you'll drag out your, you know, the visual representation of loss by another few years, another 5 years, maybe another 10 years if you're like super lucky. But the likelihood of that is low. You want to deal with this before you look at this. That's what I recommend, because at the end of the day, it's going to continue progressing no matter what growth agonist you throw at it. So don't listen to anyone who says, oh, you know, minoxidil only is the way to go. Only, you know, microneedling and LLT are all you need with minoxidil. Those things are worth evaluating and, you know, exploring, but I feel like they're of a lower priority than something like the actual thing that's going to cause hair loss. Because at the end of the day, if you're not dealing with that, you're not actually dealing with the problem. So anyways, take from that what you will. If you want to see more elaborate deep dives into how androgens actually work in the body, how to go about, you know, taking them into account in the context of a hair loss prevention regimen, what a comprehensive protocol might entail exactly, I highly recommend you go watch my other content or check out my site, moreplatesmoredates.com. Or alternatively, I do highly recommend you sign up to the mailing list in the first link in the description below, because that is where you will actually get on the list to get sent my articles as soon as they get published, and you won't get those articles otherwise unless you're on that list. If you sign up, then as soon as I publish anything, it'll get sent right to your inbox, and then you get access to my articles, which are far more elaborate, far more professionally broken down with table of contents and subsections and clinical studies linked to anything I discuss in my videos that you would otherwise want to probably look into yourself more for further research for your own personal, you know, designing your protocol or evaluating what might be the right step for you. So anyways, thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.